So thanks again for joining to the October edition of the Cloud Office Hours. The agenda, we're going to start by talking the Microsoft Security Graph. Then we're going to actually have an update from Jeff Fowler from our Security Corner, and then open mic for any questions that you might have. So your You Already Own It team is myself, Bob Ballard, Jerry Martin, Aaron Ward, and George Scott that are members of the Cloud Strategist team here at Planet. Always participate and offer to the You Already Own It community, as well as Mary Tucker, who keeps us all online, and thanks to the vision of Steve Winter, our vice president, for establishing the You Already Own It community calls. So one thing to make sure you don't forget is that at any time, whether it's during this call or any other time, that you have questions or concerns regarding strategy decisions, what does this technology mean, any of those kinds of things, please feel free to email us at youalreadyownit, all one word, at go-planet.com. Where we will happily turn around. If we don't know the answer immediately, we'll look for it or reach out to someone who does, but we aim to at least give you a response that we're checking on it within 24 hours. So this is our 16th or 17th community call, and we've covered a lot of really important topics. And in looking for this month's topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about Microsoft Graph Connect, because I think it paints a couple of pieces of the vision story for our customers. So one of the big sort of gets that we talked about shifting your technology. So a lot of you may know, but some of you don't. I worked at Microsoft for 14 years prior to the last 4 here at Planet, and one of the things I used to say when I came into customers, I come in and I, do a demo of the latest and greatest stuff in Office, and they'd say, okay, well, what do I need to own to get this? And they'd say, and I'd say, well, you need all the latest versions of Office, and you need the newest version of Exchange, and you need the newest version of SharePoint, and oh, by the way, you need all the newest versions of Windows and AD, and you need, and they'd start laughing and basically throw me out. So one of the visions that comes across, or that can be realized now with cloud technologies, is you're already getting that stuff. So all of these great interconnected technologies can be leveraged. And so I thought I'd visit one of those sort of connecting the dots technologies this month with the Microsoft Graph Connect. So what is it? So Microsoft Graph, so many of you may be familiar with Delve. So Microsoft Graph is what powers Delve. And what it does on the Office 365 side is to say, hey, let's take all this information about interactions with documents and connections between people and all of this stuff and sort of aggregate it so that we can look at how all of these things work. And so then when we add to the Microsoft Graph Connect, which surfaces this stuff for applications you can write in Azure, right? It gives you access to data at scale. So I'm not actually and we'll talk about this more later, but I'm not individually calling into these applications. I'm calling into the graph service that at massive scale that's sort of indexing and making these associations and analytics on the interdependencies between people and the content they access, and when they're available on their calendar, and all kinds of great crazy stuff. I can also, drive data governance here, where you can set these policies to say what kinds of access can these applications or O365 administrators actually have to expose this content. So example, you may want to say, I want to look at, interactions between people, but I want to anonymize it. I may want to, when I'm looking at those, I want to be able to look across to everyone's calendar, whether they're shared with me or not, but I want to block calendar details across the board. So if I'm using an application to find availability, things like that those policies can be established and then enforced across all uses of this connector. And then, super granular security access that kind of goes with the governance piece, right? So you only get access to the information they need to function. So it's not just, opening the kimono and saying, hey, I'm suddenly am breaching all kinds of privacy. It's specifically saying I'm getting, information that's anonymized when that's the right thing, information that's personalized when that's the right thing, and enforcing those based on the application. So I will apologize for the super gray looking slides here, but this I took some of these slides from a presentation, and it was rights protected, so I actually had to do some screenshots to use them. So the key part of the story here is, once upon a time, right, we had application developers and we had Office developers, and often they didn't intermingle. But nowadays, we have Azure developers and we have people that are trying to do Office automation stuff. In the world of Microsoft Connect, right, and the Graph Connect, they are becoming one. We can be a developer developing platform as a service applications in Azure, and suddenly I can leverage all this great information from Office to create things. So if we look at the Office 365 platform, right, the Microsoft Graph is sort of this AI engine that runs underneath of it all the time. Like I said, it's powering Delve today, so you're seeing one of the instances of that. But all of that information gets exposed back to be leveraged in your own internal applications, right? So, they use this word canvases when they talk about interacting with the Office 365 framework. The idea is that we can look into documents and conversations and SharePoint sites and threaded conversations on Teams and all of these kinds of things to help sort of bubble up things, right? We'll get into what they might be as we go through a couple more slides, but the idea is bubbling up exposure to information, whether it's to create new content, whether it's to have better interaction with teams, or whether it's to actually, to get more detail when it comes to compliance and auditing, right, which is another great scenario in which this stuff can be leveraged. So there are three key pillars that the Microsoft Product Group talks about when we look at this new merged world of Office 365 and Azure, right? And that's when I'm doing Office 365 development, I should be using a modern business application dev platform, right? So, instead of, we should be leveraging new technologies to get this kinds of access instead of sort of dated stuff that needs to be installed and on desktops and all of that. Secondarily, the stuff should work better because you have one cloud provider, right? So if I am building platform as a service applications in Azure and I want to leverage information in Office 365, there should be a great story to do so. And you'll see that demonstrated when Mark Quickel, who's going to do a demo here at the end of the presentation, sort of shows you just how easy it is to, in fact, connect these things up. And it should be based on, what Microsoft is always focused on, right, which is high developer productivity, right? So I shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel to get access to this information, and it should make logical sense. So if we think about, Office 365 and Azure together, for cloud productivity, accessing, we get to access the Office 365 data, reach into it, process it, apply those business rules and logic and compliance and governance standards to make sure I'm only getting access in the context in which I'm accessing the data that I should have, right? And then using, these canvases to paint these scenarios. So, the idea, one of the scenarios we talked about, and there's a bunch of them that are out there, but, just a handful of scenarios. One of them is a subject matter expert finder, right? So this is something that customers constantly ask me for. There's a couple other places I'll reference this. But the idea of saying, okay, let me reach against Graph and say, hey, I want to find a subject matter. So let's pretend this is the internal Planet team building this. I want to find a subject matter expert on certificate authorities, because that's not an obvious one. I think we all here at Planet can figure out who the O365 team is and who the Azure team is. I don't understand, who covers building certificate authorities. So, you know, through leveraging the Microsoft Graph, I can go look for people who have authored or interacted documents that have certificate authority in them. I can then stretch that, but beyond that, that's easy, right? That's just standard search, so that's not particularly interesting. But I can also then sort of layer over top of that the teams that they're in and who their managers are, right? So that I can come back and paint this picture to say, hey, it looks like this team covers certificate authorities. Here are a couple of people who have specifically created content on them. And oh, by the way, here is their manager, so that you maybe can ask permission to interact with them if that's sort of the culture you have, right? So the ability to take all these different pieces of information and expose them up. So here's a list of a couple of things, right? So you know, the core things you're doing every day in Office 365 get exposed. So if I'm writing an application that has some sort of workflow, I can easily now say, is this person out of office? Who do I go? Then I can automatically send to their manager if that's the case, right? Um, you know, where do they need to be next? What documents have they been working on recently, right? So there could be a lot of scenarios. I'm looking for someone to work on a project. What things, show me the documents that people have been working on that are relevant to those scenarios. And then also spinning it around the other way, creating great new hire jumpstarting portals, which say, because you're on this team and your manager is this person and you have this in your title, here are things that are interesting to this person. What can I look at? So we can absolutely go into Outlook, right, and easily say, I want to meet with these group of people. I want to create a meeting with these group of people, and you can use the scheduler assistant to figure out when that is. But if I want to extrapolate that out of the Outlook experience and make that as part of an application, right? Hey, I need these people. I need to schedule a meeting. I can get access into that just like I'm a regular Outlook client, find out, get the data that is leveraged to make the meeting picker, and pick the first available time and book the meeting easily out of an application with just a couple of clicks versus in minimal code versus really complex ways that you would have to do that prior to the graph, right? Subject matter expert finders. That's exactly what I referenced before earlier, right? So there's all of these kinds of things that based on all of this sort of information, real time, looking in, or deep insights, as they like to refer to it at Microsoft, and rich content. So what kinds of things call the Microsoft Graph? So I can build web applications, right? That's pretty easy. Build them as platform as a service applications in Azure, etc. I can build mobile apps that do so as well, right? So one of the things, what if I could start building, a subject matter expertise finder for outward-facing constituents in a mobile app, and I can make recommendations based on the kinds of work that people are doing day to day, right? And then put some filters on through that to say, okay, well, it looks like this department is where all these people work. So what I'll expose is not, here's, Bob Ballard and here's his phone number randomly outside on this externally facing application. What I can say is, it looks like when I put in the criteria that Bob Ballard and Mark Quickel and Jeff Fowler came back, they all seem to work in, the Bureau of Licensing. So what I'll bring back in my mobile application is, here is the Bureau of Licensing's number. That seems to be the place you would go to get that. So there's some really interesting, rich scenarios that you can deploy there. And of course, everybody's talking about bots now. They greatly improve customer experience, and of course they can leverage that. And the other side is, as part of larger line of business applications, right? We can leverage these as background processes, right? So I can find out when people are available, what teams they're in, who they're interacting with, etc. As so if that makes logical sense in part of workflows of applications, then they could be running in the background. So this is sort of the graphic that Microsoft always uses for the Microsoft Graph, but it talks about the kinds of things that can be extrapolated out of the graph, right? So things like events and content and contacts and tasks, even your email, whether how much you have to determine how busy you are. There's all these things, and these things can be anonymized or personalized depending on these governance policies that we talked about, right? Things that are trending documents or trending web pages. So I can maybe, internally when I'm trying to determine what's the example, if I'm trying to render the proper content for someone searching for something in a subject matter thing. So here are the subject matter experts. And oh, by the way, here are documents. Let's look at documents that are been interacted with more recently than others, and put them at the top of the list. There's all that kind of rich, cool functionality that you see in these, high-end search solutions, but it extends beyond just searching the content, right? It's searching, it's making those interpolations and interdependencies between the people and their availability and the content and all of those things that I can suddenly take into account when I'm doing workflow. So one of the things that comes up when you say this is to say, okay, so we've been doing stuff sort of like this for a long time, right? There's all these APIs for Outlook and SharePoint and Teams and all of those things, and that's all true. And those things will still maintain being supported for quite some time. But they do change fairly regularly, and they're all different across all the workloads. With the Microsoft Graph, I just go in and say, give me this kind of information, and it's already up to date and interacting with all of these products, and can easily make those connections across the products when it makes sense for information. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark to do a quick demo of just sort of how easy it is to get started using the Microsoft Graph connector. Mark?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for jumping on here. Let me see if I can share my screen.
I think you went on mute there, Mark.
Yes, I was just getting my screen share ready. So I think the goal here is just really quickly show you sort of how to activate these services. I do believe that the exercise from here on out then would be to take the basic services that are created and then apply policies to them. But let me just talk through it here a little bit. So this is the Office 365 Admin Center, and you can see here in the Admin Center, there's a section called Microsoft Graph Data Connect Preview. So I'm just going to click on that guy, and we'll open the panel. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen okay. And then turn this on, and you will then select an approval group. This approval group would be essentially created in the Office 365 admin, and would cover the approvers that need to approve requests to data pipelines. So I have the Graph Connect PAM approvers that I created previously. This is just an Office 365 security group. Okay, great. So once that happens, there is a time period for the service to be activated and available in your environment. And there's actually some really great steps kind of on GitHub that sort of walks through some of the details of other things that end up having to happen. But I'll just talk through some of this briefly. Once the service is activated, in Azure Active Directory, you would need to create an Azure Active Directory application. and that application would have an ID associated with it, as well as the tenancy itself and the appropriate API keys. Now, I'm going to switch tabs here quickly and go to the Azure Data Factory. The way this service kind of works behind the scenes is it uses an Azure Data Factory pipeline to grab the data from Office 365 Graph and put it into one of three locations, either Azure Blob Storage or Gen 1 or Gen 2 of Azure Data Lake Store. Now, they are planning to add additional services, but that's what it supports today, and you'll see that in a moment. And keep in mind sort of the goal of this. There's two goals. There's the sort of the connection points around getting approvals and sort of being able to filter down as you need to filter in the application. So if you have the API today, you can if you use the REST APIs or the managed code APIs of the Graph API today, you can certainly write your own queries. But the idea here is this is meant to be more configuration based. And the other idea is that this information gets stored into a data store. It gets stored as JSON files for your team. So if you're using a technology like Power BI, for example, you can attach it directly to the data store and be able to visualize information about the graph.
So real quick, Mark, just to throw out an example. So if you wanted, so there's bunches of examples, but ones that come up to me right away off the gate, and you just reminded me of this when you said Power BI, is if you want to get some analytics on the kinds of services or the amount of interactions with some of the workloads or any of those kinds of things that are going on in your environment, this can provide a lot of detail to say, hey, just so you know, management chain, we're using the heck out of Teams, and these groups are doing it, and all of those kinds of things from a usage statistics capability, also from an auditing standpoint, right? Who's using what and when and how, and how many people are doing using files that have external access to them, and lots of and you can pivot and drill down on that using Power BI. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mark, but I thought it was a cool scenario.
No, not a problem at all. So I do have an Azure Data Factory pipeline in here. It's just named generically Azure Data Pipeline, and it has a copy data rule. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. And then I have two data sets. One is the Office 365, and just to show you kind of how that's set up, let me go ahead and add a new one here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new data set. And if you haven't used Azure Data Factory at all, it's also it's kind of one of the stars of this show, really. I mean, it's the glue that's doing the work, but you can see here it's got connectors to all types of different services that you may or may not be using. If you use SQL integration services, it's very, very similar to how it functions, but provides a little bit different functionality. So let me go ahead and type in here Office. You can see it's marked as preview. And so I'm going to go ahead and click finish on that. And you can name this whatever you want. So I could call this, say, contacts. And I'm going to get contacts information from the graph. And then in the connection, I'm creating a link service. Now I've done this already to save the steps, but if you remember, I said when you create the application in Azure, you have to have like an application ID and a tenancy ID. Those are all part of Azure Active Directory. You have to specify essentially that information. And then the the Graph Connect behind the scenes does the merriment between those two, both 365 and Azure. It is required today that they are in the same tenancy. So that's a very, very key thing to understand. Otherwise, it just simply doesn't work. And so I have one in here, and then I would select a table. So this is some of the information that is available in here today. So I might select contacts. This is also a growing list. This thing came out like just over a month ago, so they're adding all kinds of new types of functionality. I could add additional query parameters here if I wanted to, but let's just jump over to the Schema tab and click on Import Schema. And so you can get an idea here of the types of information that we're going to get from the graph. Because it's a contact, I think it's pretty straightforward and understandable that we got the fields here that we did. But because there's information about companies, about office locations, and other types of things, again, this is going to go out and do the querying for you without having to write code to do that. Put it into a data store that you can then query on. And you can pass in additional parameters here if you like as well. And then essentially, once you validate and publish that, it would get published. Likewise, on the blob storage side, we have a connection set up here as well. And the way that works is you would put in, you cannot use a shared access key or anything like that, like you might from an application perspective. You do have to have a managed service identity doing the work for you. And so, you would specify a user that would have access to this. That same user must have access to Office 365, and then fill in the file path and the file format. What is it that you're looking to get from this? So once that process is done, the connector would execute. You can set that on a timer job. You can run it manually, whatever you would like to do. And then it will go out, it will query the service, and it will then send an email to that approvers list that you saw earlier on the first time, saying that it needs to basically be validated, that's acceptable. And so it will send the information as far as what data is being queried, what the subset of users or groups that are being queried in that data set, along with the individual columns that are being requested. You saw here in the schema, there's a lot of different, well, I'm sorry, it was on the other page, the different columns that are in there. And the output URI, so where is that data going? So the approvers will get an email, and they can approve or deny that. You can also access a list of the approvals through PowerShell too. And so once the user approves that, then that pipeline will execute, and the data will flow to where it needs to flow. And that just kind of helps to keep things sort of, compliant, because you're knowing what are we looking at, where is it going, to a pretty deep level of detail. So, again, this is just a very quick demonstration of the tools that are used and how to turn it on. But from there, it would be creating the custom queries as needed, and then figure out how you want to report that information or use it in an application. And Bob, I know you were talking about this briefly earlier, but one of the areas that we've run into this from a development perspective is simply writing applications and trying to keep them performant. And when you're calling a bunch of graph APIs to get group memberships or get calendar information or that type of thing, your application can get slow. Now we try to minimize that as much as we can from a development perspective, but in some cases we've actually created caches of information, and this would be a nice easy way to do it, because you can essentially query that information and have it in a local data store that your application could query very easily. From here you could create, for example, an Azure Stream Analytics script that would review any new items going into blob storage, would extract key fields and put them right into a SQL Server table, for example, if that's something that you wanted to do, because all these Azure services work so well together. So that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Let's go back to the presentation. But you can see, look, the we're just starting to scratch the surface with what this can do. Um, but you can see there are tons of capabilities to take these so now when you're writing applications and you want to see if new files are in a location, or you want to see when teams are available, or groups of people, and all these kinds of things. Today, all those APIs existed, but you call them one by one, and it slows down your applications. Where now you can just say, "Give me this, give me that, give me this. Here's what the output of this is for a workflow," and suddenly, and suddenly you can have very highly performant applications that are leveraging these services, etc. So with that, we're going to transition to Jeff, where he's going to talk about protecting and securing data and devices. Take it away, Jeff. I think you're still on mute, Jeff.
Yeah, no, it happens sometimes. So thanks, Bob. Thanks, Mark, for the demo there. I wanted to change things up a little bit this time. Instead of just giving you a few slides about a particular product or service, I want to show you a practical example of how you can help secure your devices and your data in the Microsoft 365 world. Now, traditionally, when you think about Office 365, you think of within, I've got my email, I've got my Skype and Teams and SharePoint, and that's where things reside. But the reality of the world is that your information is actually scattered across devices, scattered across, all kinds of different types of platforms, whether it be mobile or your desktops, laptops, you name it. And some are personal devices and some are, corporately owned devices. So it really makes a big difference in terms of what you have, but really the important thing is to know that Microsoft has done a great job of actually giving you an easy way of quickly configuring these things within your tenant, and as it applies to multiple locations. So in this case, as you can see at the top there, you have the continue setup option here. So what we can do is we can click on that, and it takes us immediately to a place where we can start talking about how to protect our work files on multiple devices. Now, as you look at it here, in the middle, you see where it says protect work files when devices are lost and stolen. Obviously, this is an important thing to manage and understand from an organization's perspective in terms of what that is. So when I go here, you actually have the option to delete work files from an inactive device after X amount of time. It can force users to save all their files to OneDrive for Business so that they're not sharing and saving information to their personal devices and drives. You can make sure that any corporate, business, organizational type information is stored within OneDrive and protected no matter what. Obviously, 90 days is a long period of time, so let's make that 15. And that's a pretty straightforward thing to do, as well as encrypting your work files. Obviously, you want to make sure your information is protected on whatever device it resides on. So moving on. So when you look at how users access Office files on their mobile devices, there's a lot of great options here, such as ensuring they have a PIN in place within their ecosystem of their Office files. Even if they don't have something on their device itself, you can still protect your information within the Office apps themselves. And let's say, for example, if they fail to log in, reset their PIN after a number of times as well. And then also, let's say someone's been out for a period of time, give them some time to, hang out for a while before things happen, and after that, lock up your application so that it can't get in there. Also, in the case where people have decided to go and jailbreak or root their devices, you can actually have protections in place that says where Microsoft 365 will actually do analysis of the mobile device itself and say, hey, this is not the default OS out of the box that comes with this device as it should be. This is something that's been loaded in from somewhere else. And it might be a fun thing to do to root or jailbreak your device, but the problem is 99% of the time when you do that, you have no idea what's actually being loaded onto that device when you do it, including all kinds of malware or keystroke logging or other bad things that really would cause lots of problems for you and your organization if someone had gone through and done those kind of things to their device. And also, you also want to make sure that people can't copy content from the Office apps into personal apps as well. So here's an opportunity here as well to make sure that things stay within your organization's ecosystem and boundaries, no matter where the device is or the content is. So just with these 7 settings, you can quickly exercise broad controls over how users in your organization are allowed to access your company files. So moving on, let's click next down here. So as I mentioned earlier, traditionally it's been Office 365 and email and SharePoint and things like that. But now in the Microsoft 365 world, that's gone beyond just the traditional Office 365 boundaries and moved on to actually include your Windows 10 devices as well as security in the cloud. So in this case, this shows you how you can actually help protect your Windows 10 devices in the exact same workflow process as we go through this. So now we want to secure our Windows 10 devices. That's what we have here. Now, within this area, there's lots of great options here, such as when you've got Defender in play, you can help protect your PCs from viruses and other threats. You can also help protect your PCs from web-based threats in Microsoft Edge as well. So going beyond just pure AV type considerations or protection from malware, you can actually protect your users just using the browser itself. And also, from people walking by and see what the people are doing, you can turn off your device screen after a period of time. Is also another great thing to use, and then as well as having the ability for people to protect information no matter where they are there. So, for example, if you wanted to change how long turning off the device screen when idle period of time is, you of course can click there and quickly say, you know what, instead let's make this a different period of time. So go ahead and change it, and it's a real quick, easy thing to do. If you wanted to stop people from downloading apps from Microsoft Store, you can turn it on, or if you want to allow them to do so, you can always turn it off. So there's a few different ways you can help do things here as well. If you want to have people have access Cortana, you can turn it on here, or you can turn it off. You can also turn on or turn off Windows Update, or even you can say, make sure device is always up to date and install updates automatically, just to make sure you always have the latest and greatest updates on your devices. Now, moving on to installing Office on Windows 10 devices, you can actually toggle that to select yes. So that gives the ability to automatically install things whenever people get into the organization here. Now, we can exit this and continue later on here. So going back, you also have the ability to create custom policies for different groups in your company. That way, based on what membership people have, you can set actually different device policies that have different restrictions based on who they are and what they have access to and what they're doing with devices themselves. So if we go ahead and create a new policy, you can see here in the quick flyout on the side, for example, members executive group need access to the Windows Store. So you can create a new policy. So let's go ahead, new policy name here. Called executives, and then in the drop down we can have some options as well. So for instance here you can say, from an application management perspective, here's where I want to apply things. So I would say, I want to have for example, who's got these settings, allow users to download apps from the Windows Store, for example. So you have different options with regards to that, and we can of course change things. And then when you talk about who's going to get these settings, right now, we set it up for, we want to do executives, right now it's set for all users. We go to change, and then we can change some of the other settings as well in terms of options there. So let's see here. So let's go ahead and change a few settings there. All right. And then users, right now it's set for all users, but what we want to do is change that, and let's make it to executives, for example. And then from there, we want to deselect the all users. So let's get rid of those people there. Everything is looking good, and we can go ahead and select that. And now you officially have a new policy ready to go, and just need to add that in, and officially it's done. And you've created a new policy. You've now applied it to your existing group for all your executives, and that's all set, ready to go. Now, also, let's say, for example, devices get stolen, lost, left behind, different scenarios. So when this happens, or when someone leaves the company, you want to make sure that no sensitive data is left on those devices. And you can actually do this using the remote wipe capability natively built into Microsoft 365. So when we go into device options here, we can click on the button for remove company data. And let's go ahead and search, and let's go find Patty. All right, there's Patty there. Let's select Patty, and we can see that Patty has this particular desktop. And what you can do is you can, immediately go through the process of saying on her computer, I want to go ahead and select it, and I can easily say go ahead and wipe off all data off that device. So if they leave the organization or if they lose a device, it's very easy to quickly go ahead and take care of that for you without any issues whatsoever. But we can go to cancel for now. So that was just a quick demo in terms of what you can do to help protect your data and devices using the native capabilities to build an Office 365 and Microsoft 365 across mobile devices, across Windows 10, across policies, and how easy it is to just quickly create these things and edit it and go through a simple workflow. And you're done. And that's it. So back to you, Bob.
Thanks, Jeff. That was, I think, a bunch of scenarios that are really helpful to our customer. I know we talk about all of these things all the time, so just sort of seeing how easy it is, the fact that you don't need to be a PowerShell expert, it's sort of very easily menu-driven is very powerful, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I am taking over as presenter. Okay, so just to wrap up, I just wanted to talk just for a second about, so oftentimes at the end of this session for the last 6+ months, we've been talking about Azure Advantage. Just wanted to let you know about Office 365 Advantage, which is a new service that Planet's offering around managed services for Office 365, handling things from admin support, monitoring, reporting, access to the cloud strategist to be sort of a quasi-dedicated member of your team. So one of the things that comes up often with customers is the ones that we see successful have people in role that sort of are maintaining the vision of the services and the kinds of things that need to be enabled to drive sort of a productive Office 365 environment. Some customers just don't really have that person to work as sort of a product manager for the service. Having access to folks to do that for you, as well as architecture, design, strategic envisioning, to do security reviews with you along the way. I know Jeff's talked a number of times around things like Secure Score, so regularly going through Secure Score and Compliance Manager to see, we have a number of customers that have very stringent compliance requirements, going through those on a regular basis to make sure not only are you maintaining what was there, but as you know, right, one of the reasons why you guys join these calls is that so many new features and functions come along. So to make sure you're taking advantage of them when they do to help you maintain compliance. So exciting new offer from Planet. We've already got a couple of customers that have signed up in sort of our early pilot phase. Really happy with the service. So just want to let you know about that. And with that, I think we're coming to an end of our session. Are there any questions from any of the folks in the audience today? Feel free. Well, if there aren't any questions coming in, so you can always send them to the You Already Own It at go-planet.com alias if you have questions following up, as well as, send them, type them in the IM window. I see Ed is typing something here. So thanks everybody for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next month.